to provide America with the best Army possible. As a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, it's my responsibility to provide my best.
South Dakota.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, as we approach Veterans Day on Monday, I want to rise to recognize the selfless service and sacrifice of America's veterans. As we reflect upon the generations of men and women who have answered the call to serve and defend our freedoms, we especially remember those who have given what President Lincoln so eloquently called the last full measure of devotion. And just as we owe it to the memory of those who have given their lives for our freedoms, we also have the solemn obligation to ensure that every service member comes home and that we care for those who still bear the wounds of war. Some of these wounds are physically visible, while others are not so apparent. We've made great strides in caring for our service members, especially in regard to life-saving procedures in the battlefield and rehabilitative care through the Department of Veterans Affairs. But there's still much that we must do to combat the epidemic of mental health among veterans. Traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress disorder, and the alarmingly high rate of suicide among our service members remain among the most pressing issues that our veterans face. Mr. President, we owe all of our veterans a tremendous debt of gratitude, and we must uphold the foremost duty of providing for their care. This responsibility includes aiding our veterans as they transition to civilian life by finding ways to put their skilled military training to work and through providing timely processing of medical claims. We must rise to the occasion to make sure that our past mistakes are not repeated as our troops return from current and future conflicts. In my home state, South Dakota, it's easy to see the integral role that veterans have played in shaping who we are, the South Dakotans, a legacy that dates back to before the founding of the state itself. Mr. President, South Dakotans have always punched above their weight when it comes to military service in all the various conflicts with which our country has been involved over the years. The values of service and honor are woven into the fabric of our communities. With each passing day, these values are strengthened by the men and women currently serving at Ellsworth Air Force Base, the South Dakota Air and Army National Guard, and VA centers around my state. I doubt there are many South Dakotans who do not have a family member or friend who has worn our nation's uniform. I know firsthand the sacrifice made by our nation's veterans because my own father, Harold, was a decorated World War II Navy pilot. Like all of our veterans, my dad served with pride and dignity, protecting our democracy at home and abroad. One of my favorite memories since I've been in the Senate was the opportunity to accompany my father to the World War II Memorial and to show him that great memorial that was erected in honor of his generation's veterans. I was humbled by the quiet reverence that they had for their comrades lost in battle and reminded of the ultimate sacrifice made by so many of our countrymen. We should be grateful for the generations of men and women who have given of themselves on behalf of our great nation. There can be no mistake that America's veterans have served bravely and honorably, making America the country that it is today. And as we celebrate a weekend filled with some fanfare and celebrations and people are involved in their weekend activities, I would ask that we all take a moment to remember the service of those who did not make it back to their families, and that we rededicate ourselves to caring for those who continue to bear the cost of our freedoms. May God bless our veterans, and may we continue to honor those who have nobly answered the call to serve. And on this Veterans Day, may we all keep the brave members of our military and their families in our thoughts and prayers as they continue to serve our great nation. Mr. President, I yield the floor. The quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Of the reductions under the Budget Control Act with sequestration, the Army will be forced to make significant reductions in force, structure, and end strength. Such reductions will not allow us to execute the 2012 Defense Strategic Guidance and will make it very difficult to conduct even one sustained major combat operation. From fiscal year 14 to fiscal year 17, as we draw down and restructure the Army into a smaller force, the Army will have a degraded readiness and extensive modernization program shortfalls. We'll be required to end, restructure, or delay over 100 acquisition programs, putting at risk programs such as the Ground Combat Vehicle, the Armed Aerial Scout, the production and modernization of our other aviation programs, system upgrades for unmanned aerial vehicles, and the modernization of our Air Defense Command and Control Systems, just to name a few. From FY18 to FY23, we'll begin to rebalance readiness and modernization. However, this will only come at the expense of significant reductions in the end strength and force structure. The Army will be forced to take additional end strength cuts from a wartime high of 570,000 in the active Army, 358,000 in the Army National Guard, and 205,000 in the U.S. Army Reserves to no more than 420,000 in the active Army, 315,000 in the Army National Guard, and 185,000 in the U.S. Army Reserves. This will represent a total Army end strength reduction of more than 18% over 7 years, a 26% reduction in the active component, a 12% reduction in the National Guard, and a 9% reduction in the U.S. Army Reserves. This will also cause us to reduce our brigade combat teams by 45%. Ultimately, the size of our Army will be determined by the guidance and funding provided by Congress.
A little bit late, although other members may come to the floor to speak before we close today's business. But I wanted to take this opportunity to come to the floor to associate myself with remarks of the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, Senator Mikulski, earlier this week. She has really been, as you know her very well, an extraordinary leader for many, many years in this Congress. She's truly an expert appropriator. We could have no better person trying to bring this body together, Democrats and Republicans, in my mind, than Senator Mikulski, trying to get our appropriations bills through the process, which is so important for the country, not just for our agencies and our departments, but Mr. President, you know, as a senator from Massachusetts, the thousands in your state and millions of private contractors and nonprofit organizations, not the least of which, one of my favorites, the Catholic Church, who delivers so many social services to the people of our state and nation. It's very hard for anyone to plan anything when the federal budget is in such disarray. If there's anyone that can figure this out, it's Senator Mikulski. So as one of her subcommittee chairs, I want to be here to support her work. I'm the chair of the Homeland Security Committee, and just add my voice to how important it is for us over these next few weeks to get a budget resolution done. Senator Murray has passed a budget on this side. We're finally, after the recklessness of a government shutdown, finally, everyone's come to our senses, and we're now in conference, budget committee. We've got to get that budget number done so that once we agree on what the top line spending is, or the budget for the country, we can then go about building the 14 bills that actually run the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Education. There are a couple of things that I want to say. I'm going to speak from this text for a moment and then file the rest for the record. But the important thing, the important reason for Congress to adopt a budget resolution would be for us, as I said, to provide some stability, not just for the next year, but the next 2 years, not only stability to our agencies, but to our many private sector partners, so that we can give some idea of what the outlook for spending and investing is going to be by the federal government. It's very important for our overall economic strength. We cannot afford another government shutdown that puts our economic viability at risk, denies assistance to millions of Americans. In my state, I was trying to figure out a way to describe the cost of the shutdown, reckless, and it should have been avoided, and it was not. And so I asked, you know, what are some of the things that cost about $92 million in Louisiana? And one of the things I found out is that we pay the New Orleans Saints. The payroll is $70 million a year. I mean, that would be like telling the Saints, we're not paying you for one whole year. Now, you know, we would never do that in New Orleans, but when you think about not paying the salaries of the players and then the effect that would have on the whole operation, the whole organization, the city itself, the games, et cetera, you can see the ripple effect. And that was just the impact to Louisiana. The impact to the nation was extraordinary. We have to avoid it at all cost. One of the missions of the Appropriations Committee is to make sure our federal government continues to operate on behalf of the people and the taxpayers we serve, to invest in their future, in their opportunities to strengthen families and grow businesses. They need a budget that they can count on just like we do. And when the federal government is not functioning under normal order, getting our budgets, our appropriation bills, it really does wreak havoc in many, many communities throughout our country. We need to pass our 12 appropriation bills that set priorities and invest in our future. If we are not able to get to an agreement on the budget and to set top lines for all of our appropriation bills, we will basically punt to a CR we call continuing resolution, which is like, and one of my colleagues said this, so I want to give him credit, I think it was Senator Durbin that said, it's like running your business for 2014 based on your checkbook receipts from 2013. Why would any smart business person do that? No one would run a family budget, a business operation, using last year's stubs from the checkbook. I mean, you want to pay for what you need this year coming up. You want to budget for the future. Anytime we can't pass an appropriations bill or pass a budget and punt to a CR, a continuing resolution, we're like putting the country on autopilot, but it was set for last year's weather, not what's coming ahead for next year. It really is a waste of money. It wastes taxpayer money. So I am hoping that cool heads can prevail. We can get a budget number. It's going to take some additional revenues put on the table, as well as some smart cuts and reductions, balancing between the Murray priorities and the Ryan priorities, and then we can be given our numbers to build the Homeland Security budget, and that's what I want to talk about now just briefly. Everyone knows how important it is to keep the Homeland Security of this country intact. We've done a very fine job over the last, it's been expensive. This budget has gone from zero to its current level of $42 billion, and literally post 9/11 in the last 13 years, 12 years. But it's been an investment worth making. We have a lot of threats against our country every day, from border intrusions to cyber security threats to explosions. As you know so well, Mr. President, the Boston Marathon, which frightened and terrorized an entire city and community. So there are lots of challenges. Throwing money at the problem isn't going to fix them all, but not having enough money to invest will ensure vulnerabilities, which we cannot allow. When a homemade explosive device wreaked havoc on the Boston Marathon, we saw how critical it was that law enforcement and first responders have proper training and equipment. That training, that equipment is funded through the Homeland Security bill. We've given robust grants over the years. We want to continue to be able to do that. However, if we don't get to a budget, if we don't get to agreement, grant funding would be reduced to the lowest level since it was formed 10 years ago. I don't think we want to go back to pre-9/11 investments. This is a new world. It's a dangerous world. The threats are evolving, as we saw play out in Boston. We need to be ready for the next attack, and we won't be if we can't get a budget agreement. Our cyber networks are under constant attack. There are 6 million probes, that's what we call them, on U.S. networks alone. Among the attackers we know are 140 foreign spy organizations. One example, the Syrian Electronic Army defaced the Marine Corps website, hacked into numerous print media websites. A recent annual report to Congress from the Secretary of Defense documents that China is using its network exploitation to support intelligence collections, of course, and that's understandable, but hacking in to some of our manufacturing and private sector databases to steal U.S. trade secrets, et cetera, and manufacturing secrets. We know this. It's been put into the record before, but it is worth repeating. Also this year, in the wake of serious chemical plant incidences in West Texas and Ascension Parish in Louisiana, we're reminded that our people live around chemical plants and industrial sites that are very dangerous. Lots is done to keep them safe, but if that perimeter was ever breached by people who had other intentions other than to work there and produce legal products, it could be a disaster. That is ongoing. It's a big country. It's an open country. We've got partnerships to build with the private sector, and in large measure, that's part of what our budget does. Last week, a transportation security officer lost his life. 2 others were shot in the line of duty at the Los Angeles airport. So these attacks are real. This budget does what it can with limited resources. We try to be strategic. We try to be as efficient as we can be to make sure that we keep our hundreds of airports, land ports, and water ports safe for people to move, for manufacturing and trade, and for our economy to advance. It's a big job. It takes a lot of money to do that, and it takes cooperation, and I sure hope in the next couple of weeks we can find it. We continue to face threats of weapons of mass destruction. Dirty bombs being detonated in one of our cities or ports is an ongoing worry. A radiological attack would incite not just harm, but mass panic, shut down transportation systems. We just cannot afford to not have a Department of Homeland Security budget that's looking to the future. As these threats evolve, they're ever-changing. I mean, you know how people say, well, I just bought a cell phone, do I have to buy another one? Well, the technology is changing so fast, it's hard for people to keep up. Or I just got a laptop last year, you know, and need to buy another one because the technology is changing. Well, in the same sense, threats are evolving. We can't budget for what we thought would happen 2 years ago. We need to budget for the future. And if we can't get this budget worked out, if we can't get our appropriation numbers, we will either be in a continuing resolution, which is basically funding what happened in the past, which makes no sense and wastes taxpayer money, and we'll be shortchanging our constituents. So I am going to put the rest of this into the record. I just wanted to say that 4 years in a row, the Department of Homeland Security has had to tighten its belt. Everyone has. We've been, you know, willing to do that. We've operated at reduced funding, but the impacts of the sequester, which is really a blunt instrument that cuts funding in a not very smart way. That's what sequester is. It's automatic budget cuts that were never intended. They were never designed to run the government. They were really designed to motivate us to do a better job of getting to the budget. That seems to not be working. And so as a result, these automatic cuts that are blunt, that are harsh, and that really are not smart are happening to all of our agencies, defense and non-defense alike. It's time to get rid of that inefficient way of operating and go to a more strategic, forward-leaning, planning budget process. So I hope to be a part of that. I just want to mention an agency that I'm very supportive of, the Coast Guard, not only because we build many of the boats in Louisiana, but because so many people of our people, and I think this is probably true of Massachusetts as well, are literally saved every year by the Coast Guard because we have lots of water, lots of lakes, lots of water and oceans, and lots of important things going on. Offshore oil and gas drilling. We're intercepting drugs that come in to the United States, and the Coast Guard is on the front line. They are operating its surface and air assets 25% below planned levels because of these sequestration not smart cuts. It's resulted in a 30% reduction in drug seizures. People are not happy to hear this. I am not happy to say it. And 11% reduction in interdiction of undocumented migrants. Under a year-long CR, if we went to that, Customs and Border Protection would not be able to hire any new officers for our air, land, and seaports of entry. This is bad news for travel and trade. You know, as people come into America, they say to me, Senator, why do we have to wait so long in line? We just came here to do business. We've got to get into New York, Chicago, Boston, Louisiana, California, and other places where people come to do international business. We can't shift assets from the past to the front line with a sequester. We can only do it with a rational budget that will help cities like New York, Los Angeles, Houston, Chicago, Dallas, New Orleans, and Miami to grow. This is important to business. It's important to the Chamber of Commerce. So I would urge colleagues, as I close and put the rest of this in the record, let us work very hard together in a bipartisan way to come to some agreement on our budget so that we can have direction as appropriators to design bills, whether it's for the Department of Education or the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Homeland Security, or the Department of Commerce, to fashion budgets that meet future needs, that are not funding tired past priorities, but are funding and investing in the real future needs and real-time needs, present and future needs of our citizens and the great country that we believe in and want to see get stronger. So I will submit the rest of my statement for the record. I thank Senator Mikulski for her leadership, and I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Without objection. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Pro forma them all and then choose.
It is imperative that Congress take action to mitigate and ease sequestration reductions. I do not consider myself an alarmist. I consider myself a realist. Today's international environment is emerging. Threats require a joint force with a ground component that has the capability and capacity to deter and compel adversaries who threaten our national security interests. The Budget Control Act and sequestration severely threaten our ability to do this. In the end, our decisions today and in the near future will impact our nation's security posture for the next 10 years. We've already accepted nearly $700 billion in cuts to the Department of Defense. Today, we have the premier army in the world. It is our shared responsibility to ensure we remain the premier army and the premier joint force in the world. Thank you very much, Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to talk.
Thank you so much, General Odierno. Admiral Greener.
Chairman Levin, thank you very much for mentioning our civilian personnel. Those are our shipmates, and we still have quite a few who are hurting from the tragedy at the Navy Yard. So I appreciate you mentioning them in your opening statement. Senator Inhofe, welcome back. It's good to have you here. And we all miss Congressman Ike Skelton, all of us in the military. Distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the short and the long-term effects of sequestration and our perspective on the strategic choices and management review. This morning I'll address two main points: our budget situation and our plan for fiscal year 14 and the near and the long-term impacts of sequestration. Now, Mr. Chairman, presence, that remains our mandate, your Navy's mandate. We have to operate forward where it matters, and we got to be ready when it matters. And we have to be able to respond to contingencies with acceptable readiness. Recent events this year alone have clearly demonstrated our ability to do that with deployed forces. Navy assets were on station within a few days, where needed, and offered options to the President whenever the situation dictated in North Korea, Egypt, and in Syria, as an example. Now, this ability to be present reassures our allies, and it ensures that the U.S. interests around the world are properly served. In 2014, sequestration will further reduce our readiness and will surely reduce our ship and aircraft investment. The Budget Control Act revised discretionary caps will preclude our ability to execute the 2012 Defense Strategic Guidance, both in the near term and in the long term. Restrictions associated with a continuing resolution preclude transferring funds across programs, increasing needed program quantities, and starting important new programs. The impacts of sequestration will be realized in two main categories: readiness and in investment. Now, there are several operational impacts, but the most concerning to me is that reduction in our operations and maintenance will result in only one non-deployed carrier strike group and one amphibious ready group trained and ready for contingency response. Our covenant with the combat commanders is to have at least 2 carrier strike groups and 2 amphibious ready groups deployed, and to have another 3 of each in or around the continental United States ready to respond to a crisis on short notice. So, for example, right now we have 1 carrier strike group deployed in both the Arabian Gulf and in the Western Pacific. And our 1 response carrier strike group, the Nimitz, is in the Eastern Mediterranean. So consequently, because of fiscal limitations and the situation we're in, we do not currently have another carrier strike group trained and ready to respond on short notice in case of a contingency. We're tapped out. In 2014, we'll be forced to cancel aircraft and ship maintenance, and this will inevitably lead to reduced life in our ships and our aircraft. Ashore, we will conduct only safety-essential renovation of facilities, further increasing the large backlog in that area. We will be compelled to keep a hiring freeze in place for most of our civilian positions, and that will further degrade the distribution of skill, experience, and the balance in a civilian workforce, which is so critical. We will not be able to use prior year funds to mitigate sequestration cuts in our investment accounts like we did in fiscal year 2013. And without congressional action, we will be required to cancel the planned procurement of a Virginia-class submarine, a littoral combat ship, and an afloat-forward staging base ship, and we will be forced to delay the delivery of the next aircraft carrier, the Ford, and delay the midlife overhaul of the aircraft carrier, George Washington. Also, we'll have to cancel procurement of at least 11 tactical aircraft. Now, Mr. Chairman, the key to a balanced portfolio is a spending bill, and secondarily, the option to propose to the Congress the transfer of money between accounts. This at least would enable us to pursue innovative acquisition approaches, start new projects, increase production quantities, and complete the ships we have under construction. Just to meet minimum net readiness needs, we need to transfer or reprogram about $1 billion into the O&M account and about $1 billion into our procurement accounts, mostly for shipbuilding, and we need to do this by January. After the strategic strategic choices and management review was completed, our focus has been on crafting a balanced portfolio of programs within the fiscal guidance that we were provided. Further details of our approach into what we call the alternative POM are outlined in detail in my written statement, which I request be entered for the record. Now, in summary, we will maintain a credible and modern sea-based strategic deterrent. We'll maximize forward presence to the extent we can using ready deployed forces, and we'll continue investing in asymmetric capabilities, while with this committee's help, we'll do our best to sustain a relevant industrial base. However, there are several missions and needed capabilities which are specified in the Defense Strategic Guidance that we cannot perform or keep apace with potential adversaries, and these will preclude us from meeting the operational plan requirements as currently written and defined by our combat commanders with acceptable risk. These also are detailed in my written statement. Applying one fiscal and programmatic scenario, we would end up with a result in a fleet of about 255 ships in 2020. Now, that's about 30 less than we have today. It's about 40 less than was planned in our program, our President's Budget 14 submission, and it's 51 less than our force structure assessment, which we validated and submitted, of 306 ships. So, Mr. Chairman, I understand the pressing need for our nation to get its fiscal house in order, and I'm on board with that endeavor. But it's imperative that we do so in a thoughtful manner to ensure that we sustain the appropriate warfighting capability, the appropriate forward presence, and that we be ready. Those are the attributes we depend on from our Navy. I look forward to working with the Congress to find the solutions that will ensure our Navy retains the ability to organize, to train, and to equip our great sailors and our civilians and their families in the defense of our nation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Admiral. And now General Amos.
Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Inhofe, welcome back, sir. Committee members, thank you for your consistently strong support for your military forces and for your obvious love of our country and justified concern for its defense. All of us sitting before you this morning, my colleagues, are mindful of your collective and individual sacrifices and are grateful for your unflagging fidelity. The sequestered defense budget falls short in meeting the Marine Corps' requirements and those of the Joint Force. Your Marine Corps is ready today, but in order to maintain readiness within the current fiscal environment, we are mortgaging the readiness of tomorrow's Marine Corps to do so. We are ready today because your Marines are resilient and determined to defend the United States of America. Despite year after year continuing resolutions, the Budget Control Act, furloughs, and the government shutdown, the men and women who wear my cloth are patriots first. The defense of our fellow Americans and our way of life is our #1 priority, even over the comforts of self. Last month's furlough of more than 14,000 of our civilian Marines was a grave disservice to an honorable and dedicated workforce who wants nothing more than to advance the security of the American people. Our civilian Marines are a vital part of our team. They are the technicians, the experts, the teachers, the clerks in our commissaries and our exchanges. They are our corporate memory. They are our surge capacity, our depots, who provide unique skills in support of the active and reserve force. They deserve better, quite frankly. I'm ashamed about the way they've been treated through the furloughs and the uncertainty. During this first year of sequestration, I have realigned funds within my authorities to maintain unit readiness to the highest extent possible. My priorities have remained consistent. First and foremost, the near...
Majority Leader.
Consent to call the quorum be terminated.
Without objection.
I move to proceed to executive session to consider count number 346.
The question is on the motion to proceed.
The question is on the motion to proceed.
All those in favor say aye.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no.
All those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it.
I have a cloture motion at the desk. I ask
The clerk
to be
will report.
reported.
Nomination, the Judiciary, Cornelia T. L. Pillard of the District of Columbia to be United States Circuit Judge for the District of Columbia Circuit.
I ask consent that the mandatory quorum under Rule 22 be waived.
Without objection.
I move to proceed to legislative session.
The clerk will report the
Oh,
cloture
I'm
motion.
so sorry.
Cloture motion, we the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close a debate on the nomination of Cornelia T. L. Pillard of the District of
Where are we
Columbia
now?
to be United States Circuit Judge for the District of Columbia Circuit, signed by 17 senators as follows. Reid of Nevada.
Mr.
Leahy.
President, I ask unanimous consent that the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I ask consent that mandatory quorum under Rule 22 be waived.
Without objection.
I now move to proceed to legislative session.
The question is on the motion to proceed.
The question is on the motion to proceed.
All those in favor say aye.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it.
So, Mr. President, the question is the motion to proceed to H.R. 3204 now pending?
The motion to proceed to H.R. 3204 is pending.
The motion to H.R. 3204 is pending.
I would then ask the clerk, with your permission, to report the cloture motion, which is at the desk.
The clerk will report the cloture motion.
The cloture motion.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the motion to proceed to calendar number 236, H.R. 3204, an act to amend the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act with respect to human drug compounding and drug supply chain security and for other purposes, signed by 17 senators as follows.
Mr. President, I would again ask unanimous consent to reading the names be waived.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the mandatory quorum under Rule 22 be waived.
Without objection.
I now ask unanimous consent we proceed to a period of morning business. Senators allowed to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
I now ask consent this Foreign Relations Committee be discharged from further consideration of S.Res. 280, and that the Senate proceed to this matter.
The clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 280, recognizing the 40th anniversary of the withdrawal of United States combat troops from the Vietnam War, and so forth and for other purposes.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure?
Is there objection for proceeding to the measure?
Without objection, the committee is discharged and the Senate will proceed.
Without objection, the committee is discharged and the Senate will proceed.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motion reconsidered be laid on the table.
Without objection.
I'm told that there's a bill at the desk due for its first reading.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for the first time.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for the first time.
S-1661, a bill to require the Secretary of State to offer rewards of up to $5 million for information regarding the attacks on the United States diplomatic mission at Benghazi, Libya, and for other purposes.
I ask now for second reading, but that's only in order to place the bill on the calendar under provisions of Rule 14. I object to my own request.
Objection having been heard,
Objection having been heard,
the bill will be read for a second time on the next legislative day.
the bill will be read for a second time on the next legislative day.
I ask unanimous consent that from Thursday, November 7th through Tuesday, November 12th, I be authorized to sign duly enrolled bills or joint resolutions.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes the business day adjourned until 11:45 a.m. Friday, November 8th, for a pro forma session. That would be all we would do with no business conducted. And that following a pro forma session, Senate adjourned until 2 p.m. on Tuesday, November 12th. Following the prayer and the pledge of the morning hour be deemed expired. Journal proceedings be approved to date. Time for the two leaders be reserved for use later in the day. Following interleader remarks, the Senate be in a period of morning business till 4:30, with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each. Then at 4:30 p.m., Senate proceed to executive session to consider calendar number 346, nomination of Cornelia Pillard to be U.S. Circuit Judge for the District of Columbia Circuit, with time until 5:03 for the divided and controlled in usual form prior to the cloture vote. Further, that if cloture is invoked on that nomination, upon disposition of the nomination, the Senate resume the legislative session. The Senate proceed to vote on the motion to invoke cloture on the motion to proceed to the pharmaceutical drug compounding bill. And finally, if cloture is not invoked on the Pillard nomination, the Senate immediately resume the legislative session. The Senate proceed to vote on the motion to invoke cloture to proceed on 3204, the pharmaceutical bill.
Without objection.
There will be up to 2 roll call votes then on Tuesday, beginning at 5:30. That's November 12th. There's no further business come before the Senate. I ask that it adjourn under the previous order. I'm so sorry, Tim.
The Senate stands adjourned until 11:45 a.m. tomorrow.
The Senate stands adjourned until 11:45 a.m. tomorrow.
The Senate today approved the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which would prohibit employers from discriminating against workers because of their sexual orientation. The final vote was 64 to 32. House Speaker John Boehner opposes the Employment Non-Discrimination Act and says he will not schedule a vote on it in the House of Representatives. After the Senate passed the bill this afternoon,